Cleaning up the environment, whether that be trash removal, trail maintenance, or removal of exotic plants, can have a long-lasting impact on our environment. For our civic engagement project, we specifically focused on removal of Caesarweed. Caesarweed is an invasive, non-native plant to South Florida that has taken over the ecosystem. It originally came from South America, South Asia, and India. It was brought over here for aesthetic purposes and can grow up to 7 feet in height over a singular year. It takes over many environments by pushing out native plants, and the seed pods can stick to clothes, animal fur, and is dispersed through wind, causing it to spread at alarming rates. According to the U.S. Forest Service, invasive species can cause a 42% decline of threatened and endangered species.
Our group went out with Crew, Land and Water Trust to walk the trails and remove Caesarweed. Angel, an intern with Crew, taught us how to correctly identify Caesarweed and remove it. The Crew Dome Trail, located in Immokalee, has miles of trails where you can see Caesarweed growing just off the trail. In the span of 3 hours, we collected 6 large trash bags worth of Caesarweed while only accessing a small portion of the Crew Dome Trail.
As we said, Caesarweed was originally brought for aesthetic purposes. Due to this, it can be identified by the small pink flowers that it grows. If there are no flowers, it can be identified by its leaves, which are shaped like duck's feet.
We're going to pull it out of the ground completely, and then we are going to clip this part off because these are all the seeds and we don't want them to spread. We can toss this because it'll just decompose, and then we're going to put this in the bag. We don't want to spread these or else we're just making more work for ourselves. Sometimes people will clip first and then forget to pull it, so I recommend pulling it first so that you don't forget. Sometimes they're really in there, so sometimes they'll be really big too. They're not just like this tall. Sometimes they get up here and you might need a few people to get it out.
Invasive plants have abrasive root systems and large amounts of seeds that can easily spread. This is what makes it easy for them to suffocate native ecosystems, which is exactly what Caesarweed has done here in Florida. According to the Florida Department of Agriculture, timber production, aesthetics, recreation, wildlife, or a combination of many benefits are all aspects of forest management that have been affected by these plant invasions. Also within this project, some of us had the opportunity to help Crew rejuvenate a garden at one of the trails. Over the span of a month, we pulled harmful weeds and invasive plants from the garden.
Volunteering with our community partner on November 11th, we did trail maintenance. We cleared cedarweed, which is an invasive plant here in Florida, and we also cleared a fallen tree off of the trails. To clear the tree, we had to cut it into several sections, pick it up, and move it off the trail, making sure not to crush any of the plants in the area. And moving that made a clear walking path for any guests that will be walking along those trails.
We planted some native plants back into the garden and placed pine needles down as a natural mulch. We also redid the barrier of the garden by pulling up rocks and placing them around the perimeter. Angel was the head director of this project and guided us along the way, teaching us about all the native species within the garden, as well as the species local to the Cypress Dome trails.
I'm Angel. I work at the Crew Trust. I'm an intern here, and I've been working here since August of this year. Alright, so can you tell me a little bit about Crew, like why was it founded? CREW is an acronym. It stands for Corkscrew Regional Ecosystem Watershed. So the land is a watershed. The CREW project is pretty multifaceted. I work for the Crew Trust, which is a part of the CREW project. The project is 60,000 acres. So the whole project was preserved originally because there was a drought in the area at the same time that a lot of development was going on. So it was actually preserved for the watershed.
So what do you hope to accomplish yourself while working with Crew?
So working with crews thus far, I've gained a lot of experience in environmental education, so doing programs and educating the public, different groups. Also, I've learned a lot about land management and how nonprofits work. So my goal with crew was to gain experience and have a place in the community where I help and contribute to.
Okay, so what would you say that is the biggest issue right now we have in Southwest Florida with like environment?
I would say, I'm sure everyone might say a different thing, but I would say habitat loss and development is a big problem. So on the crew project, there's a lot of new developments that corner up to our property. So I would say development is a big problem and something that we think about often, and that's why we're trying to still grow our property. So we have the project is 60,000 acres, but right now we've acquired about 55,000. So we're still acquiring land, and that's also something that we do still. So it's still growing.
How dangerous would you say our invasive species are, plants and animals?
We have quite a few different invasives and exotics at a crew. So in terms of plants, one of the ones we deal with a lot is Caesar weed, but the Crew Trust works with other partners. So one of our partners, the South Florida Water Management District, they deal with the exotics. So we tend to have crew do invasives in like certain levels, and then they do some of the more intense stuff. So we only do part of it, but it's a big part of what we do. We have a lot of volunteers come out to do invasive plant removal, and we also have hunting on the land to deal with invasive animals as well, like invasive wild hog. So we facilitate hunting to deal with that, but it's something that's always on the forefront of our priorities is dealing with invasives.
Okay, so I know today it was the service learning event for the month. How many students do you say would come out to the service learning events, like each time or just on average?
I'd say it definitely depends, especially with the last couple of years with the virus. We've had a lot of people want to be outside and working, so we've hosted a lot of service learning events to make up for not having educational programs. So we've had a lot of different groups come out, and it definitely varies. I know that this summer we had lots and lots of, but I think it would definitely vary by the season and the year. But typically we have 15 to 20 students out for different events.
What are your expectations going into environmental conservation?
I would say my expectations would be to focus on environmental education and just focus on educating people and debunking myths of things that aren't native versus native, and being able to help people get out here and feel comfortable, even not even just education, but just being that person to help others experience nature for the first time, and just be able to work in the field in conservation in general.
For our Sustainable Development Goals, we chose conservation of the environment that connects to the Life on Land UN goal. Since we are removing invasive species within our environment, we are protecting the native plants of our ecosystem. We had to use civic dialogue to communicate with the crew volunteers in order to work effectively with them.
For this project, we chose to work with Crew Land and Water Trust because our entire group is passionate about conservation, and we wanted to do our part in caring for the environment. Here in Southwest Florida, we have so many diverse ecosystems that are critical to everyday life. Ecotourism is a big industry and brings revenue to countless local businesses. Our natural ecosystems are also vital to having good air and water quality. If we were to let invasive species take over these ecosystems, they would outcompete our native species, which is exactly what Crew Land and Water Trust is trying to fight.
We knew our efforts were successful because we could see how beautiful the trails looked after we had finished removing a large patch of Caesar weed. When we were cleaning an area, quality was very important. We needed to remove as much of the Caesar weed as possible to prevent it from growing back quickly. This is one of the downfalls of this project. Nature grows. So volunteers will need to regularly go out and remove any newly grown Caesar weed. It would also take a long time to clear all of the remaining trails that were affected by the invasive plant. Similarly with the garden project, we knew we were successful because of how nice the garden looked after it had been maintained. Luckily, Crew has no shortage of volunteers, many of which are fellow FGCU students. If you would like to volunteer with Crew, we would recommend keeping an eye out for when the sign-ups go up on Eagle Link. Their events do fill up rather quickly with volunteers, so make sure you get a spot.
I learned the impact of invasive species on the environment and the importance of being aware of what's going on within your environment.
I learned the importance of the community and how you work together not only to identify a problem, but to also solve it.
One thing that stood out to me was how fast the invasive plants can spread. If we as a community worked together to remove them often, it would make a huge difference.
What I learned from this experience was how negative of an impact invasive species can have on an ecosystem. I also learned how big of an impact you can make by trying to remove them. Even in just 30 minutes, we would remove such a big portion of the Caesar weed.
Throughout the experience of working on this project, I now have a better understanding of how important the Corkscrew Swamp is to the South Florida region. I can only hope that through volunteering, I can help aid in the preservation of this fragile ecosystem.
This project, I learned about the importance of taking care of our local environment through volunteering with Crew by doing trail maintenance, taking out cedar weed, which is an invasive plant here in Florida.
We only have one Earth, so we all need to do our part to take care of it and maintain it so that there's a future for the generations to come.
What'd you find? Is that a caterpillar?
It's a millipede.
Millipede.